Good evening, and welcome to a conversation with House Majority Whip James E. Clyburn. I'm David Barker, a professor of government here at AU and the director of the Center for Congressional and Presidential Studies. We are thrilled to host and sponsor this event tonight. Our mission here at the center is to strengthen the democratic square, so we could not be more honored to be joined by someone who's been strengthening that square for several decades now. And whether you want to call him a kingmaker or a Washington whisperer or something else, Congressman Clyburn showed us last year that his voice just might be the most influential one in the entire Democratic Party. When he talks, people listen, which probably explains why we're all here tonight. I probably don't have to offer a more formal introduction than that, but I'll do so anyway. Congressman Clyburn has represented this South Carolina's 6th Congressional District since 1993. He has been elected chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, as well as vice chairman and later chairman of the House Democratic Caucus. This is his second stint as Majority Whip. He previously served in that role from 2007 to 2011, and he has served as Assistant Democratic Leader from 2011 to 2019. Congressman Clyburn also serves as the chairman of the House Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Crisis. He is also the chairman of the Rural Broadband Task Force and Democratic Faith Working Group. As a national leader, he has championed rural and economic development, and many of his initiatives have become law. His efforts have restored scores of historic buildings and sites on the campuses of historically Black colleges and universities. His legislation has also created the South Carolina National Heritage Corridor and the Gula Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor, elevated the Congaree National Monument to a national park, and established the Reconstruction-era National Monument in South Carolina's Low Country. Congressman Clyburn's humble beginnings in Sumter, South Carolina, as the eldest son of an activist, fundamentalist minister, and an independent, civic-minded beautician, grounded him securely in family, faith, and public service. His memoir, Blessed Experiences, Genuinely Southern, Proudly Black, was published in 2015, and it's been described as a primer that should be read by every student interested in pursuing a career in public service. But Congressman Clyburn is not the only reason we're in for a treat tonight. We're also honored to be joined by my colleague, and dare I say friend, Professor Valeria Sinclair-Chapman from Purdue University. She'll be interviewing Mr. Clyburn. Professor Sinclair-Chapman is a renowned American politics scholar with expertise in legislative politics, minority representation, voting rights, political participation, coalition politics, and social movements. Broadly construed, her research examines the effects of racial, ethnic, and gender diversity on political institutions and engagement. She is author or co-author of a long list of journal articles and book chapters in an award-winning book, Countervailing Forces and African American Civic Activism, 1973 to 1994, which was published by Cambridge University Press in 2006. In 1992, she spent a year working for Representative Maxine Waters as a legislative fellow for the Women's Research and Education Institute. She currently serves as a co-editor of the American Political Science Review, the nation's premier political science journal, and she is a founding director of the Institute for Civically Engaged Research, hosted by Tufts University. All right, so here's how things are going to go. Dr. Sinclair-Chapman is going to interview the whip for about 30 minutes or so. And then at around 40 minutes past the hour, we'll open things up to all of you for Q&A to let you get in on the act. Please post your questions at any time during the conversation using the Q&A tool in Zoom, not the chat tool, the Q&A tool. Also, please keep your questions civil, avoid grandstanding, and follow the Alex Trebek rule of actually asking your question in the form of a question. All right, with that, I'll go ahead and turn the virtual mic over to Valeria. Take it away.
Thank you, David. Congressman, it is such a pleasure to be here with you, and I just want to say good evening and welcome. I also would like to mention that, like you, I am a child of the South. I grew up in Fayetteville, North Carolina, the home of Fort Bragg and the 82nd Airborne. My father is from Lumberton, North Carolina, and my mother is from Greenville, South Carolina.
Right.
So I enjoyed reading your book, Blessed Experiences, Genuinely Southern and Proudly Black. And part at the beginning, one of the things that you say is that you would have actually named it, I too am a Southerner, right? And so there is something special about being an African-American from the South and the times that you grew up in and doing the work that you did. You have had a storied history as an activist on the streets, in boardrooms, and in the national legislature. In light of the 2020 election and the Biden presidency, what would you add as a next chapter to your book?
Well, thank you very much for having me, and thanks to all who are participating this evening for allowing me an opportunity to spend some time with you. To answer your question, I think that if I were going to write another chapter, I probably would entitle it, The More Things Change, the More They Stay the Same. And probably would go back to my first meeting with John Lewis. And it was also the weekend I first met Martin Luther King Jr. And that experience, that weekend of October 14th, 15th, 1960, took place on the campus of Morehouse College. And it was at a time when people don't talk about it a whole lot. There was some significant friction between Martin Luther King Jr. and those of us in SNCC. You mentioned North Carolina. Earlier that year, the spring of that year, we met in Raleigh, North Carolina, at Shaw University. And we discovered at that time that things were too fractured and we needed to have coordination. And so we decided to meet again down in Atlanta at Morehouse College. And that's the name, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, because we wanted to have coordination with all the college campuses, because after February 1, 1960, on the campus well, not on the campus, but it was North Carolina A&T students sitting in, things got fractured. Well, at that meeting, a lot of people missed this, but up until that time, King had been preaching nonviolence, but King had never been to jail. He's also been preaching disobeying unjust laws, but he had never been to jail. That meeting was all about, you got to practice what you preach. And it was right after that meeting that King went to jail for the first time. In fact, the following week. And so when you look at that and look at where we are now, I suspect I would conclude that I need to write a chapter on the more things change, the more they stay the same. Now, the reason I said a chapter and not another book, because I am starting a new book. Now, I don't know what the title is going to be. I'll start out like I did my second book. The first book I did was a tabletop on the people who started Briggs v. Eggett, that became Brown v. Board of Education. And my second book was my memoirs, Blessed Experiences. And of course, I say in the introduction to that book that all of my experiences have not been pleasant, but I've considered all of them to be blessings. And I do consider those to be blessings. But I'm about to embark upon, I've already started, a third book. And this one, I have not decided what the title is going to be. It may not be what I just said, because as you just said, when I started out writing Blessed Experiences, I had another title. I too am a Southerner. And I changed it because of my father's fondness for the hymn, Blessed Experiences. And I had to go to that hymn in order to finish the book. So that's what it would be.
Thank you, Congressman. You are just looking through your book and even hearing your description of SNCC and the activism at Shaw University in 1961 with Ella Baker. I mean, there's so much history in the Blessed Experiences. It was really just it was amazing to read. I could assign it in class, so I'm really happy to have connected with it. And also, you were a historian. I mean, so there's just there's so much. It's so rich. It's so rich, and so I think we're all waiting for this next book. So we're looking forward to it. I wanted, since you mentioned Blessed Experiences, Congressman, you are a PK. You're a preacher's kid, and I'm sure that many in the audience share that upbringing. I'd welcome your thoughts on the role of religion in politics. Recent reporting suggests that church membership is declining. It's at its lowest level in decades, but Americans seem to be clamoring for a connection to a story bigger than their own individual self-interest. I'm thinking here of the new Poor People's Campaign that's organized by Reverend Barber, also a North Carolinian, a leader of the NAACP from a small town in North Carolina. But he's championed a nonpartisan progressive alternative to the conservative evangelical religious movement. And his approach might be a model. The question for you, sir, is what can the Democratic Party do to appeal to the public interest in face of this larger purpose?
Well, I think that what we must do, it seems to me, is combat this notion that evangelicals, in a broad sense, are the spokespeople for people of faith. The fact of the matter is, we have to keep in mind that the Ku Klux Klan used as their symbol the cross. Now, a lot of people don't focus on the fact that one of the original names, and I say one because there were different factions of the Ku Klux Klan, was the White Christian Knights. White Christian Knights. We tend to gloss over the fact that there was a point back in the 20s when an after church event could very well take place down at the town square to watch a hanging. Now, a lot of people gloss over the fact that there have been speeches given from the floor of legislatures in the South in support of slavery. Now, when you look at all of that, you have to come to grips with the fact that we've got to decide whether or not we will continue to allow biblical teachings to be used to support submissiveness I'm trying to stay away from, but I got to use it because they use it to even support slavery. And people go all the way back to Genesis to make arguments in support of the difference in who's blessed and who's cursed. So what I say, my dad and I used to talk all the time about my following him into the ministry. And I thought I would. But he and I had a discussion one time. I raised the issue over missionary work. And I asked my dad, I was always sort of a smart, you know what. And so I asked my dad one day, I said, Dad, explain to me what happened to those people in Africa who died before the Christian missionaries got there. If their teachings were required to save their souls, what happened to the ones who died before they got there? I knew the moment I asked the question that I never should have asked that question. And I don't remember exactly, it was so unpleasant. I don't remember exactly how the conversation concluded, but I knew I would never ask that question again or nothing like it. And I also knew deep down inside that I probably would not be going into the ministry. But I would say this to all Christians. One of my favorite verses in the Bible, I have two favorite Bible verses. The first one is the Old Testament, Michael 6:8, where he's shown the young man what is required to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly. That is my favorite of all. But over in Hebrews, the 11th chapter, the first verse, faith, the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. These are two scriptures I live by. Now, I know that most Democrats of faith tend to rush to Matthew 25 in order to express their feelings about service. And they rush right down to verse 45, doing for the least of these. But I remind people when I talk to them, there are 44 verses in Matthew 25 before you get down to that thought. And all of those verses getting down to that thought are various parables, one of which is the parable of the talents. People using their talents for hopefully for positive or losing them. And so I say to people all the time that read the other 44 verses of 45 and see what is required of you as you build up to doing for the least of these.
Thank you, Congressman. And just to add on to that briefly, that parable of the talents is one I think that has been a guiding one for me too, because the one servant says, I hid them in the ground because you are a hard taskmaster.
Yeah,
so absolutely. I think that's a parable.
And that one was taken away from him and given to the one who had the most. And we have to be careful about it. Yeah.
You got to be willing to leave it all on the field, I think, and I think that's life. That's the character that your life has demonstrated.
Thank you.
I wanted to say that I mentioned that you were that your father was a renowned pastor. Your mother was an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
You are also the son of an entrepreneur, and I wonder. What are your thoughts on entrepreneurship more generally? Those people who are self-employed and who are really struggling coming out of the last year, with the shutdowns and the just the cost of the pandemic, and that these experiences are have disproportionately affected Black and Brown communities and women in terms of moving forward. What are your thoughts about entrepreneurship, given that you grew up in a house with a highly entrepreneurial mother? And what are you thinking about how we're going to go forward and recover?
Well, you know, I'm glad you mentioned my mom's. When I talk to people about my book, everybody tells me that's the chapter of the book that they appreciate it most. I would have thought that it was my brothers or something, but everybody seemed to really enjoy getting to my mom's. My mother overcame some real obstacles. She grew up on a little farm, and some kind of way she talked her dad into letting her leave the farm and go to school. None of her siblings finished high school, but she left the farm and went to living with a family about 20 miles away, and she kept house for them. And in return, they sent her to high school, Mather Academy, which we called in those days a boarding school, which I also went to graduate from. But my mom's, I had an experience there one time. I think I told us in the book. When I got to Mather, of course, I got into some trouble. Wasn't any serious trouble, but it was an offense that could have got me thrown out of school. And I called her to come get me, and she came. And then I had all my stuff packed to go home, and she never got out of the car. And I went out to meet her, and I told her what had happened. And then she cranked the car up and started rolling the window up. I said, wait a minute, I got to get my stuff. And she rolled the window down. She looked at me and she said, James, I believe I could live in hell for 3 months if I knew I was going to get out. She said, you got 3 months left in school. I think you can live in hell for 3 months if you knew you were going to get out. And she drove off. It wasn't quite hell for the next 3 months, but I did get out. Our house got burned down. My mom had a beauty shop. The whole beauty shop got burned up, and the house got burned up. 1953, I think the year was. She overcame all of that. And when she passed, she had 2 beauty shops, 16 operators. But she always operated that one could live in hell for 3 months if they knew they were going to get out. And I learned a lot from my dad, but I think my mom's living me more than anything else, because I tend to be more like her than I am like my dad. Though I've looked more like him and I've taken on a lot of his teachings, my personality and who and what I am, I think I'm my mother.
Right. I don't think that's so unusual, sir. So absolutely, absolutely. So I wonder, kind of given what you said about how your mother suggested that you can survive for a short while in a hard place. I wonder your thoughts about the protest of last summer, the organized protest against police brutality. And now we're in the midst of the trial against Derek Chauvin. Are these types of protests able to influence public policy at the national level, do you think?
I think so. But I also think that what you have to do is be careful not to allow the protest and your methods, even your language, to undercut the callers. When John Lewis and I were in SNCC, John Lewis was lionized by the time he died. And there's going to be the state of Georgia with all this other foolishness. They've already decided they're going to replace one of their statues in Statuary Hall with a likeness of John Lewis. He deserves all of that. Now, I must add that the state of Florida is going to replace their Confederate general. We never even lived in Florida. I never could understand why Florida had him up there as one of their statues. They're going to take that out and replace it with Mayor McLeod Bethune. These are historic things. Now, there are other statues up there, as you know. Frederick Douglass is in the Capitol, Harriet Tubman, Rosa Parks, but all of them were put there by Congress. Each state gets 2 statues. They have the right to put 2 statues in the Capitol building. And Mayor McLeod Bethune is the first person of color that's been sent up by a state, and John Lewis will be the second. So I think all of that's important for us to know. But you got to understand that what happened last summer with Black Lives Matter. John and I talked about it on the floor. We sat near the back of the chambers one day talking. It was after he had told me that things with him was coming to an end, that his illness was terminal. And we talked about Black Lives Matter. We talked about what was going on, what went on in Ferguson, which led to Black Lives Matter. But then we also said that we were hopeful that things would not happen to them, to that movement, the way it happened to ours. Now, we were doing fine with SNCC. We woke up one day and there was a new slogan out on the street: "Burn, baby, burn." Stokely Carmichael, A. Brown, they took over SNCC. And we had that same fear when we woke up one day and they were yelling, "Defund the police." We saw that as a way to undermine the movement. Burn, baby, burn. People may tell you to the contrary. A lot of people get upset with me when I say it, but there's something to be said for getting as far beyond the promises I've got. And so I call it the way I see it. Burn, baby, burn destroyed our movement. John Lewis refused to accept burn, baby, burn. He refused to say it. And they got together and kicked him out of SNCC. A lot of people don't know that John Lewis was kicked out of SNCC, left Georgia, and stayed for a year up in New York before coming back and taking over the Board of Education Project when Vernon Jordan left the Board of Education Project and went to the Urban League. So that's why the two of us spoke out against that slogan, "Defund the police." And people still argue about it, but I can tell you, those kinds of sloganeering can kill the movement. We hopefully will get beyond that. And I think we are. I think enough people stood up to that. And what we are seeing now, it's kind of interesting. I was on some program the other day and I was asked about that. And I said, it's kind of interesting to me that 2 people stand on that street, film it, or video, whatever you do, recording that event. two people called the police. So if they were anti-police, why did they call the police on the police? They dial 911 and says, there's a bad cop out here. If you want a good cop to come out here and do something about it. So Black people aren't against the police, we're against bad policemen. And they're awesome. And there's a trial going on right now highlighting the fact that there are bad policemen. I often tell the story of my dad was president of the Church's Presbytery. And the first meeting I can remember eavesdropping on in my house was when my dad and several of his cabinet were discussing the defrocking of a minister. They got rid of the minister. They didn't get rid of the church. They didn't burn the church or get rid of the church. No, they got rid of the minister. And I'm trying to say that to my friends who are police, and I have relatives who are police officers. You know, we aren't against police. We're against bad police. And there can be bad ministers, bad doctors, bad lawyers. I just saw a headline last week, 2 lawyers in Columbia, South Carolina, disbarred because they're bad lawyers. So same thing happened with doctors. They lose their licenses. So why is it that all of a sudden we can't see that there are some policemen that ought not be policemen? Just that simple.
No, Congressman, I think that you're pointing to something that's interesting. Again, I see echoes from your own history. There's an impatience that we see in the streets, but I think that what you're pointing to is there also has to be some strategy along that together, if you want to actually create the change, you have to play a long game, right? And it's
absolutely
some strategy and certainly working with policymakers. And so I think certainly there's a lot of merit to what you're saying. The critique seems to be about we want police to protect and serve.
Absolutely.
We certainly do not want to be brutalized, and I don't think that that's the question. And it's interesting to me too, is because I think the Congressional Black Caucus has for a long time played a role in really critiquing violence and police brutality. And so you're certainly not a stranger to that, but there has to be a strategy to move forward that makes policymaking possible. I do agree with that. I wonder if I can segue, because you actually made me think about the way that you do take some hard stands. And I don't want to wander off into the Confederate flag, but if I had to choose a favorite chapter from your book, it would be that chapter. Because there were so many ups and downs and twists and turns, it could practically be a Lifetime movie in terms of how you got caught in it. But I don't want to go down that route unless you want to. I want to actually ask you a question though about working across the aisle, right? You had some opposition often with the senator from your state, Senator Strom Thurmond. But you also report that there were some times when you were able to work with him to solve problems. And I wonder, do you think that would be possible to do now? Or has the nation become so intolerant to that kind of compromise and working across the aisle, and not just across the aisle, but sometimes with people who in many ways seem diametrically opposed to your own views?
You know, I did work with Strom Thurmond. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. A lot of times you have to establish some kind of a foundation upon which to build a relationship. Fortunately for me, when I went to work in the Employment Security Commission, I left teaching history in the Charleston County Public Schools and went to work because I really, back then, teachers were not allowed to be too political. And I've always been very political. And so I left the classroom and went to the Employment Security Commission. And so when I went to work there, I really got involved politically. But one of the people that I met In fact, we worked in the same office. Our desks were, we were on desks apart. It was Gertrude Thurman, who was Strom Thurman's sister. And Gertrude and I struck up a friendship. And Strom, especially if I got elected to Congress, would all tell me how much his sister Gertrude thought of me. And so I always catalog his comments in order to use when I would need in conversation. And we did work together on various things. But that didn't keep me from naming the courthouse in Columbia for Matthew Perry, who was an African-American judge who had been a civil rights lawyer, who'd been my lawyer both times that I spent. I went to jail both times I was tried for going to jail. A lot of times, we went to jail, they turned it loose and nothing happened. But there were two big trials, and Matthew Perry was my lawyer, and we got to be very good friends. And I want that new courthouse in Columbia to be named for Matthew Perry. Strom Thurman wanted the courthouse to have his name on it, and we had public disagreement over it. I'll never forget, there was a reporter in Columbia who wrote this op-ed piece about my differences with Strom Thurman. And he wrote who was going to win that. I had differences with Jesse Helms. Jesse Helms and I differed over judgeships. You may recall Jesse Helms would never approve a Black judge. And that's why I tell people about the filibuster now. Jesse Helms would never return the blue slip on a Black judge. Wouldn't do it. And I ask you, how about Ron Johnson up there in Wisconsin? Take Paul, what's his name down in Kentucky? These guys are letting you know up front how they feel. So you can't let them carry the day. Though we had public disagreement, I won that battle. It's a long story as to how I won it. So I won't waste your time here today. But in the final analysis, I won that. And I won that battle against Jesse Helms. The senior judge of the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals to this day is Roger Gregory, an African-American judge from Virginia, who never got the blue slip returned from Jesse Helms, because Jesse Helms would not approve by the Black. But I got to Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton wanted something from me. And I told him that I would be inclined to do what he wanted if he would appoint Roger Gregory to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. And it was a recess appointment. He couldn't do it in the regular time. So when Congress was out, Bill Clinton appointed Roger Gregory, and then you're talking about strategy. And not only did he get the job, but he's still there today, and he's now the senior judge in the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. And the circuit that used to be the most segregated circuit is now one of the most integrated ones.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Listen, Congressman, I have one last question, and then we're going to open up the floor for questions from the audience, and David is going to be the moderator. And so, but I could talk to you all day. I must say, like I'm already ready to talk about those the people that rescued you from the icy road, and they have Confederate flags in the back. But we're not going there. Not right now.
Oh, we can. I have no problem.
No. I have a question. So no, we may not. But another time, Congressman, I hope.
Okay.
But let me ask you this question. So after the 2012 election, I was struck and inspired by Mitt Romney's answer to a reporter's question. The reporter asked, "What will you do next?" And here this man was on the most public stage, having just failed in his biggest gambit to run for president. But Mr. Romney did not skip a beat. He merely answered that he was not sure. And now he holds a Senate seat from the great state of Utah. You, on the other hand, are riding a winning streak right now. Your endorsements have made and revived careers of President Obama in 2008 and now President Biden in 2020. But you also have known the sting of defeat. If it is not too forward to ask, sir, do you see yourself as the successor to Nancy Pelosi, the nation's first Black Speaker of the House? Is that a possibility, Congressman Clyburn?
No, I won't miss a beat. No, I got to be real about that. The fact of the matter is, I think that there will be an African-American Speaker of the House. There were several people who I thought fit that category. People like Cedric Richmond, who's now going off to the White House, Marsha Fudge, who's now going to be secretary, and Hakeem Jeffries, who is still there. I suspect that his name will come up in any conversation as to what African-American would have the possibility of being Speaker of the House. And I think that he has he's building the kind of resume that could be successful. And there are others, but I think that he's poised to be in the running. You've got, there's a young lady, Miss Underwood, from out in Illinois, who I think a lot of. She's just in her second term. I don't know how long that would be, but as for Jim Clyburn, no. I've had too many birthdays for that. So my next job after whip would probably be a rocking chair.
Oh no, well, hopefully we will still be able to hear your stories and benefit from all of the history and knowledge and experience that you've so graciously shared with us tonight. Thank you, Congressman. It has been a pleasure, just an absolute pleasure to have this discussion with you. And I'm going to turn it over to David now to continue.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Sinclair-Chapman. And thank you, Congressman. I could listen to you two talk for the next 4 hours, but we did promise our engaged audience that we would open it up to them. And so I'm just gonna pick a few of these questions here for you and let you answer them as you wish. So the first one is from Wendy Smooth. It says, Representative Clyburn, thank you for your amazing career and service. As a fellow Southerner, Georgia has given me hope for a new South that speaks to a more progressive politics. In your summation, what kinds of infrastructure investments, and I don't think she means roads and bridges, is the Democratic Party prepared to invest in other deep Southern states? With party infrastructure investments, we might see the emergence of a new Southern strategy.
Well, I thank you very much for that question, said Wendy. Thank you for that question, because I think it is a very critical question. It's something we have to think hard about. Stars line, and the stars were aligned this time for the kind of result we got out of Georgia. Now, what we have to keep in mind is that stuff in politics in this country run like the pendulum on the clock. It goes right for a while, then it goes back left, and then it goes back right. But I tell people all the time, when it's going from left to right, it passes through the center. When it goes from right to left, it passes through the center. And so we have to remember that our politics as a nation camp out twice as much time in the center as it does right or left. We went left to elect Obama, went right to elect Trump. We went immediately back left with Warnock and Ossoff. And immediately the legislature in Georgia started doing things to move it back to the right. That's what we have to always keep in mind. And you asked about the infrastructure. What we are going to have to do is stay engaged, stay focused, and keep in mind that there's no linear movement to politics in this country. It is always a pendulum, left to right, right to left, and it's the intervention of the voter that determines how long it camps out in one area or the other.
That's really great insight. I really appreciate that. So our next question is from Niambi Carter. And this is harkening back a little bit to the question that you answered earlier about Black Lives Matter. But she says, so beyond policing, would you characterize the criminal justice system overall as having more of a few bad apples or as a systematically flawed system?
Well, I don't think the system is systematically flawed. I think there are more than a few bad apples. No question about that. I think that what we've done to police is pretty much what we've done to gun ownership. We treat these things as absolute. You hear us talk about qualified immunity. It's one thing to have qualified immunity. I'm not against qualified immunity, except that we interpret qualified immunity as being absolute. And that's what we've done, given police officers absolute immunity. We don't give that to any other profession in this country. So why we do it to police officers? So no, I don't think the system itself is flawed. I just think that we have been flawed in our oversight of the system. We don't allow, most places, will not allow community committees or commissions to have any say-so about policing. Come on, why not? Why not? So I just think it's like we've done with gun ownership. The First Amendment is a great amendment to the Constitution, but as people often say, you do not have absolute immunity when you put the First Amendment at work. Same thing should be true for the Second Amendment. Why is it that the First Amendment will not allow one to yell fire in a crowded theater, but the Second Amendment is absolute? It's crazy.
Good point. So our third question is from Michael Minta. He says that we hear a lot of negative things in Congress, such as party polarization, how the parties can't get things done. We don't hear enough about the positive changes that have occurred in the institution over time. So in light of your tenure in Congress, could you please share some of those positive changes from your point of view that have occurred since you've been there?
Well, once again, you go right to left, left to right. Mm-hmm. I can take you back since I've been there. My goodness, I remember, and by the way, Gullh is Gullah. It's the Gullah get your hair discarded. I've been able to get legislation passed dealing with some pretty progressive issues. But for some strange reason, we've decided, or too many people in Congress decided, that it's more important to win an argument than to really move the agenda forward. We are supposed to be in pursuit of a more perfect union. You don't do that by turning the clock back on voting. You don't do that by turning the clock back on anything. You do that by continuing this pursuit. Now, it stands to reason there'll be fits and starts. But what we've got now is the notion that the most important thing going is to win the argument. And we don't do that in sports. I mean, good grief, you're playing basketball, you call timeout to get together. You're playing football, you go into the huddle. And sometimes you kick the ball away and give the other team the ball in order in search of a better position. Hopefully it'll improve your position on the field. We don't do that in politics. In politics, we think we got to win every argument. You know, it's one of the things I try to teach young people, that I have a group, they call themselves Clyburn Fellows, about 40 people every year selected by the South Carolina Democratic Party to this fellowship. And I fund it by and large. And I meet with them periodically. I'm not the only person that meet with them. But I try to tell them that we have to keep in mind that all of us have a different set of experiences, and therefore we're going to see the world differently. And you should never consider one to be right and one to be wrong. A guy told me one time when I first got into politics, Albert Brooks, I'll never forget him. Albert Brooks said to me, "Don't ever call a man a liar. Beg to differ with him, but never call a man a liar." And I've lived with that, you know, and we have to see that because of my background, because of my experiences, I will see the world differently. But I stayed with the same woman for 58 years. And I can tell you right now, we saw the world differently.
I bet. All right. The next question is from Carlos Alguera. Congressman Clyburn, thank you for coming to speak to us. I'm a faculty member from Claremont Graduate University in Claremont, California, and I wanted to hear your thoughts on those who suggest that no deliberation occurs in the U.S. House. We see this argument by defenders of the filibuster, wary that the Senate would simply become the House. So he was hoping to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
I'm assuming he's talking about the Senate will become the House if you got rid of the filibuster.
Yeah, it would just be simply majoritarian, and you know.
No, look, we have allowed for something we call reconciliation that gets around the filibuster when it comes to the budget. You got to run the country, and you can't let the country collapse on the altar of a filibuster. The Constitution, I don't think the Constitution should be allowed to be jeopardized by filibusters. Now, the filibuster is supposed to be there to allow for an extension of debate. So I see a thing one way, you see it another way. Maybe I can convince more of these people to see it my way if I had more time to talk. That's what the filibuster is all about, extending the debate. But that's not what the filibuster has become. It's now being used to deny constitutional rights. And that's why I say that the filibuster needs to have a point of reconciliation as we do with the budget. You shouldn't be able to filibuster my constitutional rights, my voting rights. And so I think that that's where we've got to draw the line. If I've got a legislative issue, want to pass a law, what I call a rural energy savings program, one of the laws, took me 6 years to get it passed. But that is an issue didn't involve anybody's constitutional rights, didn't involve anybody's voting rights. It's just as whether or not we will have this program to deal with rural energy policies. Gullah Geechee Heritage Corridor, South Carolina National Heritage Corridor, Reconstruction Era National Park. All these are bills I've gotten passed that it took me more than one term of Congress to get passed. But in the meantime, it wasn't denying anybody the right to vote or any of their constitutional rights. So I don't think it should be subject to the filibuster. And I think people are dead wrong when they say they get rid get the filibuster of these kinds of issues. That is, constitutional issues will turn the House, the Senate into a House. I don't think so.
All right, thanks. So got another one here for you from Pelu P. We have lost a number of key members of the Black Caucus in recent years, with the most recent passing of Representative Hastings. At the same time, there has been an emergence of a new generation of influential junior members. Are you optimistic of the trajectory of the caucus moving forward?
Yes, I am. Very much so. I did a Zoom event yesterday with Richard Torres. And I mentioned Laura Underwood, Sherry Bustos. These are all people I were on with yesterday. They're all younger members, and they got tremendous. I just mentioned Hakeem Jeffries. Yeah, absolutely. When I got to Congress, my class came in January 1993. We pretty much doubled, almost doubled the size of the Congressional Black Caucus. When the Congressional Black Caucus was formed, I think there were 8 African-American members of Congress. Today, there are what, 59? So yeah, there's much coming along. Elsa Hastings and I knew each other when we were college students. We talked about that a lot, but I always reminded Elsa. I said, yeah, Elsa, well, I was an undergrad, graduate, and you were a law student, but we knew each other. John Lewis and I met each other as 20-year-old college students. Sure, we're moving out the scene. There are a lot of young people coming along. I feel great hope for the future. I don't have any doubt that the talent is going to be there. The talent is there, but there's a big difference in having the talent and having the opportunity. And so I don't want anybody to get this messed up. There are a lot of talented people. There are talented people. I often tell the story of, we all say Thomas Edison was one of the greatest inventors of all time, but Thomas Edison could not perfect the light bulb without Lewis Latimer. Lewis Latimer's filament is what perfected the light bulb. Most people don't know that.
Yeah.
Latimer was a smart guy, the son of slaves, who had escaped to Massachusetts. But he came up with the carbon filament that made Thomas Edison's light bulb work. So he never got the credit for it.
Right.
But that doesn't mean he didn't do it. So just because you don't have the opportunity doesn't mean you don't have the wherewithal.
Yeah.
There are a lot of young Black people that got what it takes to be outstanding legislators, to be president, vice president. The question is, will they have the opportunities?
Excellent point. So do you have time for one more? I've got one. Okay,
Absolutely.
Great. So this one's from Tyson King Meadows. He says, the Supreme Court has steadily whittled away at congressional prerogatives over the years. The most egregious, perhaps, in recent memory was the Shelby decision. Given the enormous power Congress holds in Article 1, might we see the court again reject national standards if the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act becomes law?
Yes, you could very well see that. But I tell you, they'll have to find another way. Now, I'm proposing, now it hasn't been accepted by anybody. I'm having negotiations, well, discussions, not negotiations, but discussions with senators. Remember, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act is to restore really Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. A lot of people say Section 5. Section 5 allows for or cannot operate without Section 4. Section 4 is where the formula is. And that's what the Supreme Court decision, the Roberts decision, got rid of. Pre-clearance applies to a formula. Now, the reason you have that formula is because it didn't apply to every state. It only applied to around 6 states and parts of a few other states, including New York, by the way, and Arizona. There are counties in New York and Arizona covered by the Civil Rights Act of 1965. Now, suppose we did the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act with pre-clearance applying to all 50 states. You would need a formula. It will apply to all 50 states. And I've read that there are 47 states that have proposed various voting limitations that they didn't have before last election. Now, if that's true, that means there are only 3 states out there that you could apply to. So if you apply to all 50 states, which is what I'm advocating, and I've talked to several senators that says, why are we waiting around for a formula to come up? Let's just pass the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act, saying that you cannot pass any kind of constraint on voting in federal elections unless it's pre-cleared by the Justice Department. That's what I think we ought to do.
Okay. Well, thank you again so much. We're going to go ahead and let you enjoy a little bit of your evening now.
Thank you.
This has been terrific, and we're just so grateful. And Valeria, there you are. Thank you so much for hosting this for us and for serving in your role. I just think this whole thing was terrific, and I welcome everybody to give them a virtual round of applause. And with that, unless either, do you have any final words, Valeria?
No, just thank you so much, Congressman, for sharing your time with us and stories and history and experience. And we are all waiting for this next book. So let's get to it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Get on that.
I'm on it.
That's the professor in me, So
You got other work to do too, though. So don't
Yeah, I do have
neglect that. All right. Thanks a bunch, and good night, everybody.